911 call came in at 6:47 in the morning on a Tuesday. The caller, a night shift manager at a gas station off of Route 9, was barely coherent. Something about a woman, something about a car that had been sitting in the parking lot for 40 minutes with the engine running and the driver's side door open. Something about smoke, not the kind of smoke that comes from a cigarette, the thick, acrid kind, the kind that makes people call 911. Officer Megan Prescott was the first unit on scene. She had been a patrol officer for 6 years. She had handled domestics, duos, bar fights, and one memorable incident involving a man who tried to convince her that his peacock was a licensed service animal. She thought she had seen everything the early morning shift could produce. She had not seen anything like Diane. Diane Kowalski, 34 years old, was sitting in the driver's seat of a 2019 Honda Civic with the hazard lights blinking and a towel stuffed into the gap between the hood and the frame. The smoke was coming from under the engine. The car was not on fire, but it was making a sound that no engine should make, a grinding, metallic shriek that could be heard from 30 feet away. Diane was not looking at the smoke. She was not looking at the engine. She was looking at her phone, scrolling, completely unbothered, as if the car dissolving beneath her was someone else's problem entirely. Prescott approached the driver's side window and knocked. Diane looked up, not with alarm, but with mild irritation, the expression of someone who had just been interrupted during something important. And if you have ever watched someone refuse to accept that reality is happening to them, refuse to move, refuse to engage with consequences that are physically materializing in front of their face, and you felt that specific kind of disbelief, that is exactly where this story is going. And it only gets worse. If watching people learn the hard way is your thing, hit that subscribe button right now, because this channel is built on exactly that energy. To understand why Diane Kowalski was sitting in a car that was actively destroying itself while she scrolled through social media, the story needs context. And the context begins not at the gas station, but approximately 40 minutes earlier, at a Denny's restaurant on the same stretch of highway. Diane had been a regular at that particular Denny's for about 2 years. Not a beloved regular, not the kind of customer the staff looked forward to seeing, the kind that generated internal memos, the kind that had a file. On this particular morning, Diane had driven into the Denny's parking lot at approximately 6:05 a.m. She had not gone inside. She had pulled into the drive-through lane, which does not exist at this Denny's, and sat there, honking her horn, for approximately 4 minutes until a server came outside to tell her that Denny's does not have a drive-through. Diane did not accept this information gracefully. What followed was a 6-minute interaction between Diane and the server that the Denny's security camera captured in its entirety. Diane screamed from her window. She accused the restaurant of false advertising. She demanded to speak to the manager. When the manager came outside and explained, calmly and repeatedly, that the restaurant had never had a drive-through and that Diane was welcome to come inside and order, Diane told the manager exactly where she could put her menu. Then Diane pulled out of the parking lot, tires screaming against the asphalt, and merged onto Route 9 at a speed that the gas station clerk later described as way too fast for that turn. The car began making noise almost immediately. Diane did not notice, or did not care. She drove past the gas station once, then doubled back, pulled in, and stopped. Not because of the smoke, because she had realized she was going the wrong direction. Prescott's first 30 seconds with Diane established the tone for everything that followed. She knocked on the window. Diane lowered it halfway. Prescott identified herself and asked if everything was okay with the vehicle. Diane looked at her. Then she looked at the smoke drifting from under the hood. Then she looked back at Prescott. The car is fine. 3 words, delivered with complete sincerity, no sarcasm, no acknowledgement that the statement was demonstrably, visibly, audibly false. The car was not fine. The car was hemorrhaging fluid and screaming in mechanical distress and producing smoke visible from the road. But Diane had decided it was fine, and in Diane's internal world, that declaration closed the matter. Prescott, to her credit, did not argue the point. She redirected. She asked Diane to step out of the vehicle so she could take a closer look at what was happening under the hood. Standard procedure. Non-confrontational. Reasonable. Diane refused. Not with anger. Not with aggression. With the kind of casual, unshakable confidence that comes from a person who genuinely believes that no one has the authority to tell her what to do with her own car in a parking lot where she had chosen to stop. Prescott explained that she was not asking Diane to do anything illegal or unreasonable. She was asking her to step out of a vehicle that was producing smoke so that the situation could be assessed safely. Diane told her she had somewhere to be. Prescott noted, gently, that the car did not appear to be in any condition to go anywhere at the moment. Diane closed the window. The next 4 minutes were a masterclass in what behavioral psychologists call reality tunneling, a state in which a person becomes so locked into their own internal narrative that external evidence, no matter how overwhelming, fails to register as relevant. Diane had constructed a story in which she was a person who was running late, in a car that was working, on her way to somewhere important. Every piece of information that contradicted that story, the smoke, the grinding noise, the officer standing at her window, was simply filtered out. Prescott called for backup, not because the situation was dangerous. Because it was stuck, she needed another officer to help navigate a civilian who was not engaging with the basic reality of what was happening around her. Officer Troy Bashir arrived 4 minutes later. He was senior to Prescott by 3 years and carried himself with the particular calm that comes from having talked to thousands of people who did not want to talk to him. He approached the Civic, assessed the situation in about 5 seconds, and then did something Prescott had not tried. He walked around to the front of the car and opened the hood. The smoke poured out in a thick, white cloud. The engine was leaking coolant at a rate that suggested the radiator hose had either split or come loose entirely. The grinding sound intensified the moment the hood was up, as if the engine had been waiting for an audience. Bashir closed the hood and walked back to Diane's window. He knocked. She lowered it again, this time with visible annoyance. He told her, plainly and without drama, that her radiator hose was failing and that if she drove this car any further, the engine was going to overheat and seize. He told her that driving a vehicle in this condition was a violation of state equipment laws. He told her that he was not trying to ruin her morning, but that he could not, in good conscience, let her pull out of this parking lot in this car. Diane stared at him for a long moment. Then she said, very clearly, I have somewhere to be. The decision Diane made in the next 10 seconds would define the entire trajectory of her morning. She put the car in drive, checked her mirror, and began to pull forward. The grinding sound intensified immediately. A new stream of fluid began dripping from the undercarriage, pooling on the asphalt in a spreading dark stain. Bashir stepped into her path. Not aggressively, not with any physical threat. He simply stood in front of the vehicle, one hand raised, palm out, in the universal gesture that means stop. Diane stopped, but not because she respected the gesture. She stopped because there was nowhere else to go. The parking lot exit was blocked by a delivery truck that had arrived while the officers were talking to her, and Bashir was now standing between her front bumper and the only other way out. She was boxed in, and she knew it. What happened next revealed something essential about the way Diane processed frustration. She did not yell, she did not pound the steering wheel, she did not make a scene. She simply sat there, engine grinding, smoke drifting, hands on the wheel, staring at Bashir with an expression that was completely blank. As if she were waiting for the situation to resolve itself, the way a loading screen resolves itself, without any input from her. Prescott approached the driver's side again. She asked Diane, one more time, to step out of the vehicle. This time, Diane complied, but she did it in a way that communicated, without a single word, that she was doing so under protest and that she considered the entire interaction to be a personal inconvenience imposed upon her by people who did not understand how the world was supposed to work. She stepped out, phone still in hand, and immediately began walking toward the Denny's. No one told Diane she could not go inside the Denny's. No one stopped her. She simply decided, on her own, that the Denny's was where she needed to be, and she walked there with the kind of purposeful stride that communicates total certainty. Prescott and Bashir exchanged a glance. They had not placed Diane under arrest. They had not issued a citation yet. They had not even formally started the paperwork for the equipment violation. Diane was, technically, free to walk wherever she wanted. She was a civilian in a public parking lot who had stepped out of her car voluntarily. But she was also walking away from an active investigation. And she was walking into a restaurant where, based on the security footage that would surface later, she had an extremely recent and extremely unpleasant history. Prescott followed, not running, not with urgency, just following, at a reasonable distance, to maintain visual contact and to be present if the situation inside escalated. It escalated within 45 seconds. Diane walked through the front door of the Denny's, walked past the hostess without acknowledging her, walked directly to the counter at the back of the restaurant, and slammed both palms down on the surface hard enough to rattle the napkin dispensers. She demanded coffee, loudly, not loudly the way a person demands coffee when they are having a bad morning. Loudly the way a person demands coffee when they have decided that the universe owes them something and this is the first installment of the payment. The counter server, a young man who had clearly seen Diane before based on the way his expression shifted the moment she appeared, told her that she would need to take a seat and wait for a server to come to her table. Diane did not take a seat. The next 3 minutes inside the Denny's were the kind of scene that restaurants have security cameras for. Diane remained at the counter, escalating her demands in both volume and specificity. She wanted coffee. She wanted it now. She wanted it in a specific cup that she had brought with her from outside, a large travel mug that she produced from her jacket pocket like a prop in a one-woman show. She wanted it black. She wanted it hot. She wanted it without the server looking at her the way he was looking at her, which was, to be fair, with a mixture of alarm and barely concealed dread. The manager emerged from the back. This was the same manager who had dealt with Diane earlier that morning in the parking lot, the same woman who had patiently explained that there was no drive-through. She had been on duty for less than 2 hours and had already encountered Diane twice. The manager told Diane, firmly but without hostility, that she needed to either take a seat or leave the restaurant. She explained that Diane's behavior was making other customers uncomfortable. She explained that if Diane continued to cause a disturbance, the manager would have no choice but to ask her to leave the premises. Diane looked at the manager. She looked at the server. She looked at Prescott, who was standing near the entrance, observing the interaction with the quiet attention of someone who was already composing the incident report in her head. Then Diane picked up a coffee mug from the counter, one that belonged to another customer, a man sitting 3 stools away who was in the middle of eating pancakes, and held it up. She did not throw it. She did not pour it. She simply held it, making eye contact with the manager, and said, "Watch me." The moment Diane lifted the mug, the calculus of the situation changed. Before that moment, she was a difficult customer. After that moment, she was a potential threat. Prescott moved from observation mode to intervention mode in a single step. She did not lunge, she did not grab, she simply closed the distance between herself and Diane, positioned herself between Diane and the other customers, and spoke clearly and calmly. "Ma'am, put the mug down, put it down, and we can talk about this." Diane looked at her. The mug stayed up. Prescott repeated the instruction. Same tone, same calm, same complete absence of aggression or threat. Put the mug down. The man whose mug it was, the pancake man, had frozen mid-bite. The server had backed up against the wall. The manager had her phone in her hand, ready to call 911 if the situation escalated further, though 911 was already present in the form of Officer Prescott. Diane held the mug for approximately 4 seconds. It felt longer than that. Then she set it down on the counter. Not gently, she placed it down with a sharp crack against the surface, as if she were punctuating a sentence. Then she said, "You people are insane." And she walked toward the back of the restaurant. The back of the Denny's connected to a narrow hallway that led to the restrooms and, beyond the restrooms, to a fire exit that opened onto the alley behind the building. Diane walked down that hallway with the same purposeful stride she had used to walk into the restaurant. She pushed open the door to the women's restroom and went inside. Prescott followed to the hallway. She did not follow Diane into the restroom. There are protocols about that. Instead, she positioned herself outside the door and called out, politely but firmly, that Diane needed to come back out to the main restaurant so they could finish their conversation. No response. Prescott knocked on the door. She identified herself as a police officer. She explained that she was not trying to arrest Diane. She explained that she simply needed Diane to come back out so they could sort out what had happened with the vehicle and the incident at the counter. From inside the restroom, muffled but audible, Diane's voice came through the door. "I'm not coming out." 4 words, delivered with the same flat, unshakable certainty that had characterized everything Diane had said since the moment Prescott first knocked on her car window at the gas station. Not defiant, not panicked, simply stated as fact, the way someone might say the sky is blue or water is wet. Diane had decided she was not coming out, and in her internal universe, that decision was final and beyond challenge. Prescott called Bashir on her radio. She told him where she was and what was happening. Then she settled in to wait. What followed was a 22-minute standoff in the hallway of a Denny's restaurant, and it is one of the most psychologically revealing sequences in the entire video because of how little happened on the outside and how much was clearly happening on the inside. Every 3 to 4 minutes, Prescott would knock on the door and repeat her request. Every time, Diane would either say nothing or repeat some variation of her original refusal. At no point did Diane express fear. At no point did she cry or scream or pound on the door from the inside. She simply sat in there, silent and still, waiting for the situation to change on its own. This is a behavior pattern that psychologists refer to as magical thinking applied to consequences. Diane genuinely believed, on some fundamental level, that if she stayed in the restroom long enough, the officers would eventually get bored and leave. That the situation would dissolve. That reality would rearrange itself around her refusal to engage with it. It is the same magical thinking that had led her to sit in a smoking car and declare it fine. It is the same magical thinking that had led her to walk into a restaurant where she had already been flagged as a problem and demand coffee as if she had every right to be there. Diane did not process the world as a place where actions produced consequences. She processed it as a place where her preferences were the default state, and everything else was an inconvenience to be waited out. Bashir arrived back at the Denny's and took over the door. He tried a different approach. He told Diane that no one was in trouble. He told her they just needed to talk. He told her that the longer she stayed in there, the more complicated everything was going to become. Diane said nothing. At the 22-minute mark, the manager of the Denny's approached Bashir with a key. The restroom had a staff entrance that could be unlocked from the hallway side. The manager had already made the decision that Diane could not stay in there indefinitely. This was a business. Other customers needed to use the restroom. The situation had become untenable. Bashir thanked the manager and told her to step back. He knocked one final time. He announced clearly that he was going to open the door. He gave Diane a 10-second countdown. Diane did not respond to the countdown. She did not brace for impact or scramble to a defensive position. When Bashir opened the door, she was sitting on the closed lid of the toilet, phone in hand, scrolling through social media, in precisely the same posture she had been in when she was sitting in her car at the gas station. The symmetry was striking, the same body language, the same expression, the same complete absence of acknowledgement that anything unusual was happening. Bashir stepped inside. He did not grab her or manhandle her. He simply stood in the doorway and repeated what he had been saying for the past 22 minutes. Diane, we need you to come out now. We need to talk about what happened this morning. Diane looked up from her phone. She looked at Bashir. She looked at the open door behind him. And then she said something that would become the defining line of the entire interaction. I don't see why. The phrase "I don't see why" communicates everything that needs to be understood about how Diane Kowalski experienced the world. It was not a challenge. It was not a negotiation tactic. It was a genuine expression of confusion. From Diane's perspective, there was no logical reason why she should have to come out of a bathroom and talk to a police officer. She had not, in her own mind, done anything wrong. The car was fine. The Dennys had been rude to her. The officers were being unreasonable. The universe was conspiring against her morning, and the bathroom was the one place where that conspiracy could not reach her. Bashir did not try to explain why. He had been in law enforcement long enough to know that explaining the logic of consequences to someone who has opted out of logical consequence processing is like trying to have a conversation with a wall. The wall does not understand language. It simply exists, solid and immovable, and no amount of talking changes that. Instead, he told Diane that he was going to give her 30 seconds to stand up and walk out on her own. He told her that if she did not, he was going to have to physically escort her out. He told her that he would prefer the first option because it was easier for everyone involved, including her. Diane considered this for approximately 15 seconds. Then she stood up, very slowly, tucked her phone back into her pocket, and walked past Bashir into the hallway without making eye contact with anyone. She had decided, apparently, that the bathroom had served its purpose. Whatever calculation she had been running in her head, whatever she had been waiting for during those 22 minutes of silence, had concluded. She was done hiding, not because she had been forced out, because she had decided, on her own terms, that it was time to leave. At least, that is how she would tell the story later. The walk from the restroom back to the main restaurant and then out to the parking lot took about 90 seconds. Diane walked it with the same unhurried, purposeful stride she had been using all morning. She did not look at the other customers. She did not look at the manager. She did not look at Prescott, who fell into step beside her and began, gently, to explain what was going to happen next. Prescott told her that she was going to be cited for the equipment violation on her vehicle. She told her that based on what had happened at the counter with the mug, she was also going to be cited for disorderly conduct. She told her that these were not arrests. They were citations. Diane would need to appear in court on the date specified, but she was free to go home in the meantime. Diane listened to this information with the expression of someone hearing a weather forecast for a city she had never visited. Interesting, perhaps. Relevant, certainly not. When they reached the parking lot and Prescott produced the citation paperwork, Diane took the papers, looked at them for about 3 seconds, and then handed them back. She told Prescott she did not need these. Prescott told her she did, actually. These were official documents. She needed to keep them. Diane looked at the papers again. Then she folded them in half, very precisely, and slid them into her jacket pocket without another word. The legal analysis of what happened to Diane Kowalski that morning is less complicated than the psychology, but it is no less instructive. The equipment violation was straightforward. Every state in the country has statutes requiring drivers to maintain their vehicles in safe operating condition. A failing radiator hose that is producing smoke and grinding noise is not a gray area. It is a textbook violation, and it is the kind of citation that, if ignored, escalates quickly into a suspended registration or a failure to appear warrant. The disorderly conduct citation required more careful construction on Prescott's part, and she built it methodically. Disorderly conduct requires behavior that disturbs the peace or causes alarm to reasonable persons in a public place. Diane's behavior at the counter, the escalating demands, the refusal to comply with the manager's reasonable requests, and most critically, the moment she picked up another customer's mug and held it while making threatening eye contact, satisfied every element of the statute. What is legally fascinating about the mug incident is that Diane never actually did anything with it. She picked it up, she held it, she put it down, no one was harmed, no property was damaged, but the threat of what she might do with it, communicated through her body language and her words, was sufficient to constitute the kind of public disturbance that the law recognizes as criminal conduct. This is a detail that many people do not understand about disorderly conduct laws. You do not have to break something. You do not have to hit someone. You simply have to behave in a way that a reasonable person would find alarming or threatening, in a public space, and you have crossed the line from annoying to illegal. Diane crossed that line. She just did not know it at the time. The second story in this video begins at a nail salon on the east side of the same town, approximately 1 week after Diane's morning at the Denny's. And if Diane represented the archetype of the person who refuses to accept that consequences exist, the woman in this story, a woman named Sandra, represents something different and arguably worse. Sandra did not refuse to accept consequences. She accepted them enthusiastically. She just believed, with iron certainty, that they applied to everyone except her. Sandra Chen, 41 years old, was a regular at the nail salon. She had been coming there for about 3 years, every 2 weeks, without fail. She was known to the staff as a good tipper when she was in a good mood and a nightmare when she was not. The line between those two states, according to the salon owner, was thinner than you would think. On this particular afternoon, Sandra arrived at 2:15 p.m. for a 2 p.m. appointment. She was 15 minutes late. This would not normally be a problem. The salon was not fully booked. The technician who had been assigned to Sandra was still available, but Sandra had not called ahead to let them know she was running late, and in the 15 minutes between her scheduled time and her actual arrival, the salon had given her appointment slot to a walk-in customer who had been waiting. Sandra did not find this arrangement acceptable. The confrontation at the nail salon lasted approximately 8 minutes before it spilled out into the parking lot, and it was captured on the salon's exterior security camera from elevated angle that provided a clear, unobstructed view of the entire sequence. Sandra had argued with the receptionist first, then with the salon owner. Then, when neither of them would cancel the walk-in's appointment and give Sandra her original slot, she had demanded a refund for a previous visit that she claimed had been unsatisfactory. The salon owner told her that refunds for completed services were not offered. Sandra told the salon owner that she was going to report the business to the health department. The salon owner, a woman named Grace who had been running the business for 11 years and who had clearly dealt with difficult customers before, told Sandra that she was welcome to do that, and then she asked Sandra to please leave the salon. Sandra left, but she did not leave the parking lot. She walked outside, stood next to her car, and began recording the salon on her phone. She narrated what she was doing for the camera, explaining to her future audience that the salon was engaged in illegal activity and that she, Sandra, was documenting it for the authorities. She held the phone up toward the front window of the salon, pointing it at the customers and staff inside, and continued recording for approximately 4 minutes. This is when Officer David Reyes arrived, not because of anything Sandra had done, but because a customer inside the salon had called 911 and reported that a woman outside was filming them through the window and making threatening statements. Reyes's body camera captured the first interaction with Sandra from the moment he pulled into the parking lot. Sandra saw him arrive and immediately shifted her posture and her expression. The angry, combative energy she had been projecting toward the salon evaporated in about 2 seconds. She smiled. She lowered her phone. She walked toward Reyes with her hand extended, as if she were greeting a colleague at a networking event. She introduced herself. She told Reyes that she was glad he was there. She told him that the salon had been engaging in discriminatory practices and that she had been documenting the evidence. She presented herself, without any apparent irony, as the complainant. The victim, the person who had called for help. Reyes listened. He thanked her for her concern. He told her he was going to go inside and talk to the salon staff to get their side of the story, and that he would be back out to talk to her afterward. Sandra agreed to this plan. She seemed genuinely confident that once Reyes heard the salon's version of events, he would come back out and validate her position entirely. She was wrong about that. The conversation Reyes had with Grace and the salon staff took about 6 minutes. Grace provided a clear, calm account of what had happened. Sandra had missed her appointment. The slot had been given to another customer. Sandra had argued, demanded a refund, been told no, and been asked to leave. Grace had a record of Sandra's appointment time, a record of the walk-in's arrival, and 2 staff members who had witnessed the entire exchange and were willing to provide statements. Grace also told Reyes something that changed the nature of the investigation. She told him that Sandra had, during the argument inside the salon, told her explicitly that she was going to make the salon's life difficult. That she was going to come back. That she was going to make sure the salon suffered for what Grace had done to her. This was not a threat of violence. It was a threat of harassment. But it was a threat, made in front of witnesses, and it provided context for Sandra's behavior in the parking lot. She was not documenting illegal activity. She was retaliating. She was using her phone and her presence as weapons against a business that had, from her perspective, wronged her. Reyes went back outside. Sandra was still standing by her car, phone in hand, smiling. She asked him how it had gone. She asked if he had seen what she had seen. She asked if he was going to do something about the salon. Reyes told her, carefully and directly, that based on what he had heard from both sides, it appeared that the salon had followed its standard policies and that Sandra had been asked to leave after becoming disruptive. He told her that her continued presence in the parking lot, filming customers through the window, could be construed as harassment or intimidation. Sandra's smile disappeared in about half a second. The shift was so fast it was almost jarring on the body camera footage. One moment she was pleasant and cooperative. The next moment she was something else entirely. What Sandra said next, and what she did next, is the moment where her story stops being a story about a difficult customer and starts being a story about someone who has fundamentally misunderstood the relationship between entitlement and the law. She told Reyes that he was wrong. She told him that she knew her rights. She told him that she had done nothing illegal and that if he tried to do anything to her, she was going to sue him, the salon, and the entire police department. Reyes acknowledged her concerns. He told her he was not trying to arrest her or do anything to her. He told her that all he was asking was that she leave the parking lot and not come back to the salon. He told her that this was not a formal warning. It was a suggestion, a professional suggestion, from one adult to another, that continuing to stand in this parking lot filming through that window was not going to end the way she wanted it to end. Sandra considered this for about 5 seconds. Then she told him she was not going anywhere. Reyes asked her one more time. He kept his tone level. He kept his body language open and non-threatening. He gave her every possible signal that compliance was the easy path and that the easy path was still available to her. Sandra shook her head. She crossed her arms. She planted her feet. Then Reyes informed her that she was being cited for harassment and for failure to comply with a lawful police request to leave the premises. He told her that the citation did not require her to go to jail. It required her to appear in court on the date specified. He produced the paperwork and held it out toward her. Sandra looked at the citation. She looked at Reyes. She looked at the salon. Then she took the paper, tore it in half, and dropped it on the ground at his feet. That single act, the deliberate destruction of an official police document in the presence of the issuing officer, converted a misdemeanor citation into a criminal offense. Reyes told her, without raising his voice, that she had just made the situation significantly worse for herself. Sandra told him she did not care. She was arrested on the spot. Hands behind her back, into the back of the patrol car. The entire sequence took less than 45 seconds from the moment she dropped the paper to the moment the door closed behind her. 2 women, 2 mornings that should have been ordinary. 2 sets of choices that turned routine inconveniences into criminal records. Diane Kowalski sat in a broken car and declared it fine. She hid in a Denny's bathroom for 22 minutes and waited for the world to rearrange itself around her stubbornness. She walked out on her own terms, or at least she told herself that is what happened. And she walked directly into citations she could have avoided entirely by simply talking to the officers like a reasonable adult. Sandra Chen lost a nail salon appointment and decided that the salon owed her something. She turned a 15-minute delay into an 8-minute argument, a 4-minute harassment campaign, and a criminal arrest, all because she could not accept that sometimes the answer is no and the appropriate response to no is to leave and find somewhere else to get her nails done. Neither of them were dangerous people. Neither of them were criminals in any traditional sense. They were 2 ordinary women who, on 2 ordinary mornings, made a series of choices that each seemed, in the moment, completely justified. The car is fine. I have somewhere to be. I don't see why. I'm not giving you anything. I'm not going anywhere. Each statement felt true to the person who said it. Each statement carried the weight of absolute certainty. And each statement moved them one step closer to an outcome they would spend weeks, possibly months, trying to undo. The question that this footage leaves unanswered, the question that no amount of body camera footage or legal analysis can fully resolve, is this. At what point does a person realize that their certainty is the problem? At what point does the internal voice that says I am right and everyone else is wrong become loud enough to drown out every warning sign that is flashing right in front of them? Diane and Sandra both had multiple moments where they could have stopped. Where they could have listened. Where they could have walked away clean. They did not take those moments. And the reason they did not is the same reason, in both cases. They could not imagine that they were the ones who were wrong. Let me know your thoughts in the comment. Do remember to hit the subscribe button, like and share this story, and I'll see you in the next one.